Think about someone you know. Okay. Are they centered? Are they centered within themselves? Are they decisive? Do they live with integrity? Do they protect the environment around them, people and things around them? Do they provide order? Do they create and inspire others? Do they bless the lives of others? Do they leave a legacy? Have you thought of anybody? Anybody that you know? I was talking with Ariana last night, and I was saying there are people who have, in some sense, you look at these things and people who work in environments, or maybe they're an employer or something, and you think, I can see some of these things. You know, the realm wouldn't be like a kingdom, but their company, right? Protect the people in your company. You bless their lives. You have the opportunity to do that. You can inspire and create creativity in others. You know that you're decisive. You make good decisions. You live with integrity, and people can see that. And you bless the lives of those around you. We all have opportunities to do that, no matter what we do and who we are. Now, these are characteristics of a king, right? Or a queen. And we think of this in terms of when we think of the gospel with Jesus. Yeah, we can see that in him. His realm, his sense of his kingdom, it's not as defined as an earthly king would have, where you've got your geographical boundaries and you have your realm, right? You can measure that. But these things, the earthly kings, and some were good, and some were not so good. And I wonder, why is it that they described him as a king when we know back in the day kings were very different than that? They had the crown, they had the royal scepter, they had the throne, they had the kingdom, they had probably the moat around their kingdom. They had their royal subjects. They probably had royalty from father to son or daughter and on the line. It wasn't as if someone could come in and take it, although that happened. But a true kingdom went passed on generation to generation. And we do see that in Israel and Judah. And we'll read that there was a good king, there was a bad king, there was a bad king, there was a good king, on and on. Those who were in favor with God. Christ the King Sunday, we think of Jesus as a king, but really not as described by an earthly king, because there are so many differences. Jesus was simple. He was plain. He was one of the people. He didn't rise up in the ranks. God didn't choose to send him to the best leaders as one of the best leaders or one of the higher ups in the kingdom to have power. And why would God do that? I would think if you wanted to get your point across, if you wanted to show your best, you would use the best. You know, if you've got a company, maybe you want to advertise with the best advertising agency. Or use the best salespeople you could find. Or the best engineers that money, Why would God choose a carpenter and his 14-year-old bride-to-be? Why does God, through the least of the people, show the best in God? It doesn't sound very right, does it? How powerful is that? We choose the lowliest in our society, and we treat them well, and that shows how good we are. Sometimes we do that. Various missionaries will do that, use the poor to build themselves up, and not really make a relationship connection. It happens. It happens everywhere. And we have to be mindful of that. But Jesus, in his way, was showing the people that this is the best that God has. There's a quote I remember, I found it. The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. I don't know how to pronounce it. Fyodor Dostoevsky. How we treat the least shows what kind of a civilization we are, how civilized we are. Why would that matter? Why would we consider the poor and the lowly to be measurements of how advanced we are, how much like God we are, or how much we're following the example of Christ that He gave to us? Oftentimes the poor are overlooked in our society. If there's elections, the poor are not really mentioned that much. It's middle class usually, or upper class. In poor, once in a while there's a mention, but we're not really into that so much. We need to be mindful of that. Jesus took the time to be with people. And I have to confess that when I'm in a car and I come to an intersection, I ignore the person who holds the sign that says I'm hungry and homeless, because I don't know what to do. I find this deep sense of powerlessness in a way. I mean, I can give $5 or $10 or $15, $20, but I think there's so much more they need that I just can't seem to give. It doesn't make a difference, does it? Perhaps not in the long run. Maybe on the short run, a meal or shelter is what they need for the day. Needs met for just a moment. But we think we need to, well, at least I do. I think I need to give beyond that. How can I make this so there's nobody on the street corners homeless or hungry? How can I make a difference in society that they will not exist? How can I make it so that people will feel included, that all will feel included? We have our blinders on. We have our colored glasses on. There's been an experiment, a group of people in a room, and they give them a problem and come up with a solution to this problem. So the person who, and they're all demographics of social status and economic status, and it didn't really make any difference whether they were a different race or color or creed. They said, come up with solutions. So the homeless person who came up and said, this is a solution that I came up with, and people will listen. And then you have the businessman, let's say man or woman, in a suit and tie, or business suit, come up with a different solution. Who do you think people listen to? Yeah, it's been proven. The one in the business suit. Whether their solution is better or not. And if it's the same, we tend to think in those terms. Not quite equal because of dress or other things. Jesus made a point, sometimes extremely to the point of helping those who are in the situation where they're hurting and vulnerable. Separating sheep from the goats. And I looked up in the dictionary because I was wondering, how were sheep considered, how were goats considered back then? And both were in a positive light. I thought, why would it make a difference between goats and sheep? And somebody had said that, it's the goat hair is dark and they make cloth that's not necessarily good. And the sheep produce white wool, which is made for vestments and things like that, which are a little higher order. So goats. And then I asked my daughter, you've heard of scapegoating, right? You've heard of a scapegoat? You know where that comes from? It comes from Scripture. Where the whole town is messing up. So the priest is sent, and they grab a goat. The priest takes all the sins of the community, puts his hands over the goat, and transfers all those sins and evil to the goat, and then sends the goat on to the wilderness. A scapegoat. And we know what probably happens after that. The goat either dies or gets, carnivores come and get it. Something or another. Jesus is still making his point about sheep and goats. He's still pushing the fact that people need to get in line and try to live a better life. Try to live a life that's not centered on so much on themselves and their wonderful actions and wonderful faith of following the rules to the limit without considering the needs of others. Only being considered how I am doing. Am I saved? Doesn't matter if you're, just as long as I'm saved. And Jesus is saying, you know what? There will be a separation. And you wonder if that's God's judgment on the world. Separating the sheep from the goats. You know, and those who care for the poor, take care of the poor, and the ones he mentioned in the gospel, they'll be shown with favor. Do the right things. Act righteously and justly. And you'll be rewarded. What about some of us who do good sometimes and not so good other times? What camp are we in? I wonder, if it's Judgment Day and I go up to the heavenly pearly gates with St. Peter and he says, oh, give me a roster of what good you've done and what bad you've done. I'm thinking, oh, what day is it today? How many? I hope today I've done more good than bad. Like, oh my gosh. We call that works righteousness. If it's all up to what I do to be saved, well, I might as well hang it up now because my not so good is oftentimes bigger than my good. No matter how hard I try. And Luther ran into that problem and couldn't figure that out until he talked about grace and said, you know what? It's not up to me. It's up to Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. It's through Him that I am saved because I can't do it on my own. Although Luther was an Old Testament scholar, he followed Paul pretty closely in some of Paul's writings, pretty closely, and came up with this and figured out the grace piece so that he can finally rest at night, knowing that it's not all up to me. One theologian said, if it were up to us, why would we need Christ if it's up to what I can do or not do? Well, it's all about Christ. It's all about what Christ does for us, what Christ did for us on the cross, in the resurrection. That lowly man who showed us that lowly people have a lot to say, have a lot to offer the world. Oftentimes it's to give us eyes to see, and ears to hear, and hearts to be opened, to listen, to see, to know that we all contribute to this world, that none of us are higher or lower than anybody else. Does Jesus give up on the rich? Does Jesus give up on those who have? No. We're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor, black or white or Hispanic, Chinese. It doesn't matter if we come from a good, strong family or not such a good, strong family. If we have healthy families or dysfunctional families, Christ is there for all of us. In some sense, we are lowly as well in many ways. It was also pointed out that Luther talked about saint and sinner at the same time in the same person, metaphorically. But I think Jesus is trying to get the point across that we need to be mindful of others and take ourselves out of the middle. That God's love is for all of us. Ezekiel talks about sheep. It doesn't make a distinction between sheep and goats, but sheep. All of us. That God's care for us as a shepherd, as king, a different kind of king, envelops all of us, no matter what. No matter if we want it or not, Jesus is there for us. God has faith in us, although sometimes our faith wanes in God. That is always secure, willing to get us to a place of righteousness and justice so that we can go out and love our neighbor as we love God, as we love ourselves. That God is a true king in the sense that He cares for all and has saved us all. Amen.